Welcome, my name's Rebecca Dolan. I'm the Shakespeare and Schools Coordinator at the Gaiety School of Acting. With me today is Daniel McDermott, and we'll be workshopping Act 1, Scene 2 from King Lear. Welcome, Dan. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a stop and start of Act 1, Scene 2. So this is basically our first kind of major introduction to your character. We have seen him, but we have not really heard his thoughts before. So this is quite a powerful scene, and especially at the start, because we really get to hear what's going on in your head.
Yeah. It's our first introduction to who ultimately becomes one of the biggest villains of the play, arguably one of the biggest villains ever in Shakespeare. And it's the first time really that the audience are brought in. It's a soliloquy with the audience, and they're acknowledged in this world, definitely in the way we did it anyway.
Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start the scene out. We'll watch a little bit of it. I'm going to pause it, and then we'll just discuss a little bit what we've seen, okay?
Thou, nature, art my goddess. To thy law my services are bound. Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom and permit the curiosity of nations to deprive me? For that I am some 12 or 14 moonshines lag of a brother. Why bastard? Wherefore base? When my dimensions are as well compact, my mind as generous, and my shape as true as honest madam's issue. Why brand they us with base? Baseness, bastardy, base, base. Our father's love is to the bastard Edmund as to the legitimate. If this letter speed and my invention thrive, Edmund the base shall top the legitimate. I grow, I prosper. Now, gods, stand up for bastards.
Pretty intense speech. So if just in kind of layman's terms, just explain kind of your thoughts behind what you think the character is going through at this point, and what he's trying to explain.
Yeah, he's explaining his, simply put, his point of view, his position within the court. But he's saying, I am human. Essentially, when you break this down, this is like, for me anyway, doing this, because obviously before actually I should say any of this, there's a million readings and there's a million ways to do everything with these characters. And there's different folios, there's different ways to pronounce things, depending on your director, depending on the direction. Things will change. And like I've seen different actors take commas in different places, which completely changes the meaning. But that's why we still do Shakespeare, and that's why everything's up for grabs. Punctuation it can fluctuate. So in layman's terms, for me at the start of this, he's basically going, I am what I am. I'm as good as my brother. I'm a different age, but I'm everything he is. And I should be treated that way. I deserve these things in the same way that we see a lot of Shakespeare's protagonists and heroic characters. Almost like it's strange to have, well, for me anyway, the feeling of the bad guy straight away talking to the audience and putting away. Do you know, we see Cordelia in the next scene talking to the audience and having asides and going, what shall Cordelia do? Speak and be silent, and talk about her emotions. But in this play, we get this isn't right. This court isn't right. The way they're treating people for Edmund feels wrong. And in this speech, he's saying that nature art my goddess. This sense of my duty and myself are what are going to lead me here. There's a lot in this speech that that drives Edmund fundamentally through the rest of the play. But it is the small snowball that he tosses down the hill. We get straight away that we're not in a Christian society. We're not in a Christian world. We're not in God in this traditional sense of the world. We're looking at pagan beliefs, but he does subvert that a little bit within his language, and he does make a mockery of that a little bit at the end when he's like, now gods stand up for bastards, and the fact that like subverting the natural in what they think the natural is and what the natural order is. He says that God, it's almost that God created me. The debate that we eternally have with having a higher deity, but going, oh no, but this is lower. When we sort of say that the gods create us all equal, but some are better than others, doesn't make any sense, which is what he's fundamentally struggling with, I feel here. He's going, well, we're all equal, but we're not equal, and I'm going to make it so, basically.
Do you think Shakespeare uses the character to make like a kind of a larger statement about society, or?
I would really love to hope so. It's Shakespeare can be definitely used for those means, and these characters can definitely be used for those purposes. In the same way that Shylock and Othello and things like that can say very contemporary things. I hope so. As I say, perhaps as an actor, maybe I'm never thinking about that when I'm on stage. But as a reader and as somebody who's studied Shakespeare, I find it very hard to believe that a man of that caliber, that was artistic in that way, wasn't trying to say things about the time that he lived in. Yeah. The things that he saw. He was definitely making statements later on in the play about unity and division and that, like, that we spent great time talking about. But with Edmund, I think he is making a statement of that we're all equal. Yeah. But he's also making a statement of be careful what you wish for, because Edmund wishes to have more power and more control, and ultimately he gets what he wants, but it goes to a place where ultimately it causes his downfall.
So at this point, after his soliloquy, we kind of have an input into his thinking. Do we have sympathy for him at this point, or are we just waiting and going, holding our judgments?
I think we definitely have, from the little that we know. Like, if you take just this scene and the scene previous, the prologue almost, when we have Kent and Gloucester talking about Edmund in his presence, and Edmund sort of half in the conversation, but not really in the conversation. And then if we take that in conjunction with this soliloquy, you could definitely go, this guy is being wronged. He's in the sense of, he seems to have his wits about him. He's here, he's in court, he's a smart man. Like, Gloucester talks about him being a good son, and that he loves him, but he can't treat him the same because his mother, it wasn't legitimate and they weren't married. And she conceived him before she could have a husband. And you definitely, depending on how the actors play it and the director perceives the vision of the play, how you want to paint Edmund in this is very important. Like, there's other productions that we've looked at that will put Edmund almost as a Clark Kent kind of character, where he is one very distinct character with the audience, which is kind of that very comfortable being bad, very fine in his own skin about doing horrible things. And then when he's with the court and when he's with the family, he's a different person. So we see that kind of Loki element that we talked about, that kind of two-faced ability to definitely work a crowd. That's, I think, something Shakespeare wanted straight away. He wanted Edmund to come out and work the crowd. Soliloquies are essentially that, for me. It's an actor's, we always talk about, you're never speaking to no one. Ever. Soliloquies are never your inner thoughts. That's anyway the way I approach it, because that's a very lonely place to be on stage. What's my motivation for saying this? Oh, it's my thoughts. It's not. I think Edmund's trying to get these ideas to the audience and go, what do you think? Are you here with me? And I think there's definitely, as an actor playing that part, you can, from young men in the audience, you can, and young women as well, because it's an issue, you know, especially young people, because that's who our audience was, you know, Leaving Cert students. And there's that, I'm being misunderstood. Nobody understands me here. Nobody gets me. And there's a bit of teenage petulance, like the same sort of ideas with Hamlet, and you know, the soliloquies bringing people in, going, "Can you help me here?"
Yeah.
He's not speaking in a vacuum, so he is, I think, starting to plant the seed of sympathy. But that kind of, he doesn't need it after this speech. I think by the end of it, when he goes, "God, stand up for bastards," he has gone, I've got them. I can do it.
Yeah, so already we're starting to get an idea of his character. He's very forceful, very sure of himself. You'll see throughout the course of the play, you can see that he's a charmer and such. But I think in the next bit of the scene, we're going to see his kind of ruthlessness, his resourcefulness, his cunning coming into play. So I'm just going to go quickly to that scene.
Now, God, stand up for bastards.
Kent banished us, and France in choler parted. The king gone tonight subscribed his power. What paper were you reading?
Nothing, my lord.
No? Well, what needed then that terrible dispatch of it into your pocket? Let's see. Come. If it be nothing, I shall not need spectacles.
I beseech you, sir, pardon me. It is a letter from my brother that I have not all overread.
Let's see. Let's see.
I hope for my brother's justification. He wrote this but as an essay or a taste of my virtue.
This policy and reverence of age keeps our fortunes from us till our oldness cannot relish them. Come to me, that of this I may speak more. If our father would sleep till I waked him, you should have his revenue forever, and live the beloved of your brother, Edgar. My son, Edgar. You know the character to be your brother's?
If the matter were good, my lord, I durst swear it were his. It is his hand, my lord, but I hope his heart is not in the content.
Hath he never heretofore sounded you out in this business?
Never, my lord. But I have heard him oft maintain it to be fit, that sons at a perfect age and fathers declining, the father should be as a ward to the son, and the son manage his revenue.
Villain! Villain!
So what we can see is he has had a plan in mind for a while, I think you could say, because he has the letter prepared. It's not something that's just come into his head. So kind of Machiavellian in some ways. And he's done it at a time where he knows there's a lot of unrest in the court as well. What are your thoughts on what he's done so far in the scene?
It's a really interesting thing that he does here, because he's basically told the audience that he's gonna work his way up. And the first time you read it or the first time you play it, the letter is crucially important. He shows it enough that Gloucester sees it and then puts it away, and it's all the give and take. If he walked over and went, "Yeah, there you go," there might be question of why was there no reluctance. But we see a nature in him that perhaps has been long-standing. He doesn't question the fact that he's trying to protect his brother. He doesn't. It seems that. And I know that when we went through the play, and because we talked about it every day when we workshop like this, that the idea of why does Gloucester believe him? And the idea that he must be a good son and he must be a good brother because they believe him.
There's no doubt in Gloucester's mind. He's straight into, he's like villain.
And like Edmund's the one who starts making excuses, which it's weird. It's a really weird scene because what you would think is the other way around, that Edmund's trying to plant this idea. So you would think he would be the one going, villain, villain, his opinion's in the letter, but it's not, it's Gloucester. And Edmund's actually the one going, listen, he's probably checking to see if I want to kill you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's the reverse psychology. So we see a very smart man in this scene, and the whole play, the Edmund's character is very top heavy. It's really, this is his scene. This is really the story of Edmund is within this meeting with his father and his brother. We don't, he's never on stage really that long after this. It's a great exploration because it's not bitty at all. It just, he goes, this is the character I am, and now I'm going to leave and I'm going to take care of all of this. And I know we'll get to that in a minute, but he definitely, the little camera, like in the recording, the play, the looks to the camera that are done would have been done obviously to the audience in Smock Alley as it was recorded there. Yeah. But that was definitely something I was trying to do. I was trying to give winks and the nods to the audience to go, I've got him. Yeah. Watch this. And it feels like that's where he is. And it's definitely the two masks. As we move on, you see it more that he goes, he can play on their superstitions. Yeah.
He seems to have a really good grasp of them as people as well. Like, you know, in King Lear, there's a lot about, you know, King Lear not understanding his daughters and Gloucester perhaps not understanding his sons. But your character certainly gets people and their motivations very much in contrast with everyone else.
I think the two sisters and Edmund are great watchers in the play. That they sort of they do see what's going on better than the older generation. Arguably, like in the original production of this, me and John talked very, very heavily about this, that Edmund has learned to do this from somebody and he's learned to be this person. Well, that was where we came at it anyway. And that perhaps Gloucester has taught Edmund too well, that he's this politician that has that, you know, I definitely explored that a little bit, that the idea that Edmund was good at politics because his father was good at politics. He's like, Gloucester survived in this court, which seems to be a pretty hard court to survive in, if this play is anything to go by, or this snapshot into it. So I think there's a little bit, definitely the first time I did this production, we talked a lot about Gloucester and Edmund are very alike, maybe a little bit more alike than either would care to admit. And we went down that line. We went down that superstition kind of, that they're in tandem with each other. And he knows how to play his father because he is his father and he knows what would work on him. So he manipulates him in that way. And we can see that definitely when he comes to the bit I think it's in a minute, where he talks about the sun and moon do portend no good to us. And Edmund's kind of going, but he talks about it later and he's like, this is nonsense. But I know him well enough that I can play him.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what I find interesting is what he has said in the letter is very similar to what King Lear has actually done just previously. He wants to be looked after by his daughters. But Jack Gloucester blows up with this idea and calls him a villain, but he's after watching King Lear literally do the same. I find that a really interesting kind of plot device as well.
Yeah, it's like, I think that's, we talk about this, you know, that like Gloucester's coming into this scene with that energy where he's seen his best friends, in inverted commas, do something a little bit foolish in his opinion. Yeah. So he's coming in and he's kind of like, he has a very hot energy, you know. I think the line for me in the letter is, if my father should sleep till I waked him, where he goes, oh, that's an issue. That's, you know, I think Gloucester is a little uncomfortable, as is Lear, as is the whole thing in the play, the theme of old age and being comfortable with getting older. Lear tries to do it and it kind of backfires. And I think Gloucester is uncomfortable with the handover of power. but that's again up to interpretation and up to play, you know. But yeah, you're right. The comparison in this scene is, you know, it's very strong. Although we don't see Gloucester go, Edmund or Edgar is banished. It's the same idea, you know.
Yeah.
Cordelia and Edmund are both, then they never see their father again.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll continue with the scene and then we'll stop afterwards and have a chat.
His very opinion in the letter. Where is he?
I do not well know, my lord. I dare pawn down my life for him that he wrote this, but to feel my affection to your honour. If your honour judge it meet, I will place you where you shall hear us confer of this, and by an auricular assurance have your satisfaction.
These late eclipses in the sun and moon portend no good to us. Brothers divide. In cities, mutinies. In countries, discord. And the bond cracked twixt son and father. Find out this villain, Edmund. It shall lose thee nothing.
This is the excellent foppery of the world. I should have been that I am, had the maidenliest star in the firmament twinkled on my bastardizing. Edgar! And pat he comes. Like the catastrophe of the old comedy, my cue is a sigh like Tom of Bedlam. Oh, these eclipses do portend these divisions.
Kind of reveling in his plan starting to work there a little bit at the end, but you can still see the anger. Like he is angry at the world.
Yeah, you could spend your whole time as Edmund, I feel, screaming at everybody. And there was days where I probably did. But yeah, he definitely comes out of that. Like, we see a real Shakespearean device, which is go and hide and have a listen. Do you know, like it's Polonius and Hamlet.
Yeah.
Go and hide behind the arras. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Do you know, like they never hear what they want to hear, or it's never good. So I think, you know, like he's definitely won his father over there. And then by the end of it, where there's definitely a feeling of, it really lands that moment of seek out this villain, Edmund, it will lose thee nothing.
Yeah.
And Edmund is at that point going, well, the worst case scenario here is I get rid of my brother. And that's it. You know, like it's like, and the best case scenario is then he's gone and I'm in charge. And that's, you know, and I think that's really interesting. There's a million ways to go about this scene. Donal went for a very, like, he's a very angry Gloucester. And that's 100%, because the tempo and the rhyme and the rhythm, or the rhythm within the speech, definitely brings you along like a train, and Gloucester definitely goes off. But John slowed that right down as well the first time we did it, and that was very interesting to have two different fathers. John played that very hurt, very like, oh, Edgar has completely betrayed me.
Yeah.
And that's the start of Gloucester going off the cliff, pardon the pun. But like, he loses his son there. And I think it really, like, even if he doesn't feel it in that moment, he obviously feels it later after the blinding and, you know, spoilers. But it's a very interesting scene. And it's a scene for us that changed daily. It just, depending on where John was that day, we had days where he cried in that scene. And that definitely like what we were talking about earlier with sympathy for Edmund, that completely takes all of it. I think that scene, that moment of, oh my, he's really going for his father. He has no sympathy here. I think we have a bit of sympathy for Edmund at the start, and then his actions in this scene, I think straight away you go, But that speech of, like, we see again him disowning the gods that he proclaims to be bound by. You know, when he's like, I'd been what I am, had immediately a star in the firmament twinkled on my bastardizing. He's like, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Nah.
Yeah, he's throwing out tradition, really, isn't he? He's just like,
Yeah.
I don't play by the rules. I'll make my own up. Thank you.
Yeah, but he knows, as we said, he knows his father well enough that this, you know, this, like, there's research I did, and I might be way off the mark, but I'm pretty sure I'm correct that when it was first performed, it was around a solar or lunar eclipse as well.
Yeah.
And the superstition that was around that within the people of the time, what this was going to do. And it is Shakespeare definitely playing on that superstition, that witchcraft, that kind of element of, ooh, and it's that one guy that stands in the corner going,
no.
come on. Do you know, it's the guy that rips out the horoscope page and he's like, I create my own destiny. And that's, you know, that's one way to approach it.
And I suppose whenever you look at scenes, like, obviously we're a contemporary audience and we watch them, but they weren't written for us. They were written very much for the audience of the day. So you have to imagine that for us, it's okay. Like, you know, we don't hold so much to superstitions, but at the time it was generally in the public, they did. So for someone to come out like Edmund and just disown it, it would have much more of an impact on that audience than it would on a modern audience.
Yeah, it would be. There was things like again, that's talking about stuff that is really hard for us to understand because we're not in that paradigm anymore, and we can't understand how superstitious they were, if they were or if they weren't, or you know, I feel like it a little bit, you know, when he kind of talks about that, it's kind of like disowning science in a sort of way in this.
Yes.
In this play, he's kind of going, yeah, the earth is flat. That kind of idea. And that's fun to play with. But I don't, I wouldn't, if you're studying the piece, and if you're obviously doing it for leaving cert or another exam, or definitely the context of this is huge. But there's loads, we're lucky with this play that we have somewhat of a knowledge of when it was and who it was for.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
We'll continue on with the scene and see what happens next.
So la me.
How now, Brother Edmund? What serious contemplation are you in?
Come. And saw you my father last?
Why, the night gone by.
Spake you with him?
Aye, 2 hours together.
Parted you in good terms? Find you no displeasure in him by word or countenance?
None at all.
Bethink yourself wherein you may have offended him. And at my entreaty, forbear his presence. If you do stir abroad, go armed.
Armed, brother?
I am no honest man if there be any good meaning toward you. Now I pray you away. A credulous father and a brother noble, whose nature is so far from doing harms that he suspects none. I see the business. Let me, if not by birth, have lands by wit. All with me's meet that I can fashion fit.
So that's our first introduction to Edgar. Like, it's a very short introduction. You can't really tell much about a character, but I suppose what stands out is that there's a definite power element, and it doesn't lie on Edgar's side. It definitely seems to be Edmund's. Like, he's controlling everything around him, and everyone is so quick to believe him as well. Like, it's again, we've said it could be he's a really good relationship, so why wouldn't you believe him? But then, what do Edgar and Gloucester not have a relationship? You know.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic that we definitely see here. Talking about, you know, the shadow and the silhouette that's created by myself, and the similarity that then holds. It looks like he's being told what to do by his father. There was an image there with the shadow where you couldn't really tell faces, and I thought that was really interesting in this production or this clip. That I think Edmund here feels a little bit like this is his father and he's being bossed around a little bit. And that's interesting to play with. We don't really like definitely the way Ethan's playing it. Edgar's quite jovial. Edgar's quite easygoing.
Yeah.
And that's used a lot within that character. That perhaps Edmund is the more serious, courtly brother because he has something to prove, and Edgar's perhaps the one that's out drinking and having fun, and you know, he has this downfall because he's not wise to the ways of the court. I think it's interesting what we were saying, and just flicking to different parts in the play and stuff like that with Edmund and his relationship to Edgar and his father. Obviously, with them, he has a great relationship, and maybe that's something he can manipulate. But then we'll also see him completely manipulate the two sisters. Arguably, you could play it in different ways, that the sisters are also working with him or against him or manipulating him. But in a reading of the play, you could talk that he is just good at playing people.
Yeah.
And I think all with me's meat that I can fashion fit. He knows that he can work situations. He's good at that. And I think he knows that that's where his strength lies, in the manipulation.
And he's definitely, he says it at the end, he's going to get the lands by his wit, by nothing else, you know. So he knows what he wants. He wants power. Yeah.
He definitely, and then later when he talks about my state stands on me to defend, not to debate, he gets into, there's been a lot of, like for the rest of the play as well, he's one of the only characters that soliloquies and talks to the audience. But at this point, I think he goes, I'm done with that, let's go. And he doesn't really talk to the audience again until he has the issue with, you know, like with the sisters and which of them shall I take, and that speech, where he again, I don't want to say wavers because that's wrong. He thinks he's thinking it out. And that's interesting to watch.
So based on that scene, what kind of assessment can we make of his character? What have we learned about Edmund?
We've learned that I think he, more than a lot of the other players in the scenario, knows himself a little bit better than, you know, that's something that always comes up with when you talk about Lear. He has seldom known himself. And he doesn't hide. He doesn't put on a disguise ever in the play. He's himself, and he's at the start of the play quite comfortable in his own skin. And arguably, I don't know if that changes really until perhaps his death. So we learn who he is, and I don't think that changes. I think that amplifies. I think he gets more himself through the play, which is interesting because Edgar has a completely different trajectory. He becomes further from himself, but through that learns more about himself than Edgar does. We learn that, for me, we learn that he has a good relationship with his father, at least to his father's thinking. And the same with his brother. So if he's trusted within their circles, arguably he'd be trusted within the rest of the court. So that lines us up later for when he tells the guys that Gloucester is helping the king, and that's treasonous, and they believe him straight away. Basically, it's true, but you know, like he's working everybody, and he has a reputation, which, if you just take his first monologue and go, you know, like, I'm this, everybody views me as bastard, base bastard, that kind of, like when I do those lines in the soliloquy, he's hearing other people calling him, you know, the bastard child. He's, you know, and he's uncomfortable with that. And if you take just that speech, you would think that he's treated very poorly, but arguably, is he?
Yeah, like he is in the court, he is around people, and his opinion does seem to matter. So, like, how much of it is like from himself as opposed to like outside factors? It's an interesting argument, you know.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's an element of that, other people calling him bastard and looking down their nose at him, and he has taken that to heart. He doesn't want that anymore. But it's a tough one because he starts to wear it in a way. I'm the illegitimate bastard son, and I'm gonna get what I want, and that gives him strength. I think he's been called it so many times that he can start to wear it and own it. Yeah,
and like I know we've talked about it before, but it's like kind of in kind of modern culture and certainly in films and stuff, you can see a lot of similarities with Loki in kind of like the Marvel stuff. And he's like he wears it as well, and he's cheeky and he's conniving, but he's also, you know, he can convince people what to do. So it's interesting. It's an interesting kind of comparison.
It's definitely a concept that comes up again and again in popular writing, pop culture writing, and in mythology and stuff like that. The illegitimate son, the creating your own enemy kind of idea as well. That, like, Gloucester created him by not embracing him as his son. Gloucester created this situation of a bastard son that completely manipulates everybody. You know, that nature versus nurture idea but that's what Edmund's saying as well. He's saying, I would have been like this had everything else been different. I'm who I am.
Yeah.
And I would have always been evil.
And do we think he's the biggest kind of, he's the most evil person in the play in terms of what he does? Are there other villains as well on the same level as him?
I think it's hard to get away from the blinding of Gloucester. Like if you to get into like psychological violence and abuse and physical abuse and to put merit on that, you can't really do it. You can't really say which is worse.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think as far as mentally and what he does to his brother and, you know, and his father, he causes a degree of madness within those two characters. Like, they don't go off breaking point, and they don't, well, arguably Gloucester does, but what he does is he's very unremorseful, really, until the end of the play, which even at that point is some good might I do, is a strange, you know, final lines. He definitely is one of the biggest villains, but then when we look at, like, Regan and Cornwall and you know, they're kind of right up there. That's legendary. One of the most visceral scenes on stage, you know, even with all of the Martin McDonagh's and the sort of gratuitous violence that we now see really coming to the fore on stage. The Gloucester scene done right is very, very hard to beat. As it was a scene that you hear a lot of actors talk about the play Edmund when you stand at the side of the stage and you can hear Gloucester scream, Edmund, Edmund, where is my son?
Yeah.
And that's where you realize that playing that part, you're very remorseless. You're very cold, because he doesn't really show repentance for that, really. Like, Edgar talks at him at the end about his father being gone, and that might be a part of the catharsis and part of the revelation of some good might I do. But I think rather when you're playing the character and stuff like that, you justify why he does the things he does. But subjectively, looking at from the outside in, he's probably the biggest villain, one of the biggest villains in Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Shakespeare's back catalogue, full stop. You're getting into sort of Richard III territory to surpass him. And then, you know, obviously your Iagos and stuff like that as well. They're all people who play other people. It's kind of a recurrent theme. And I would say he's one of the biggest. He's definitely mentally the biggest villain. He plays people to his own advantage.
And we get such a good kind of insight into his thinking as well, which we don't really get with Goneril and Regan. Like, you know, like Shakespeare gets us into understanding Edmund and kind of seeing where he's coming from. Whereas with the two sisters, you get less of that in the play. They kind of react, you know?
Yeah, which sometimes can make the sisters look more cruel than Edmund, because you do get Edmund's reasoning, and he reasons it out and goes, look, this is why. This is, you know, I've been treated this way. Whereas with the sisters, depending on how the Lear relationship is portrayed at the start, you don't really have sympathy for them. I've seen several productions of Lear and went, why do the sisters do what they do?
Yeah.
Like Cordelia's being honest. She's you can watch the show and go, there's no reason for these two to be this way except to get what they want.
Yeah.
Whereas from talking to Charlie and the actor who played Lear, when you get into it and go, like, he gave them that and he expects them to look after him. and they don't give him that. If
Yeah.
you take away that aspect, the ladies don't look after their father, and that creates an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, as you say, it kind of makes them, like we talk about sometimes, does Edmund get sympathy? Do we have any empathy for him? But we don't usually have those same questions surrounding the two sisters. You're just going, no, they don't seem to be seen in the same light. And it's probably because, as you say, you don't understand fully their reasons for behaving. Like you can imagine why, and you get some inference in the text and stuff, but you don't get into their head. Like the way
but weirdly, when we were doing the play, and definitely like Goneril and Regan, those scenes that Edmund has with them,
yeah,
there was a familiarity with the three of them, with the
Yeah.
three of us, and then two sisters, when especially doing like scenes with like Goneril and the kisses that we had and the placement of them, that Edmund feels a connection to those two characters because of the way that they're ultimately treated. I think that Edmund knows he's not the favorite son, and I think the two daughters know that they're not the favorite.
Yeah.
Cordelia's the favorite. So I think there's a gravitation to each other to go, well, we're never going to be the best in the court, so let's go and get it by any means we can. And you can definitely go down that, the three wicked sisters almost. Yeah. The three ugly sisters idea of let's get Cinderella. And because otherwise we're going to be left with nothing. We're entitled to nothing because we're not the favorites. They knew Cordelia arguably was going to get the bigger portion of land.
Yeah.
And Edmund knows eventually it's all going to Edgar because it has to. So the only way that they can fight that is to literally fight that. And depending on your outlook on life and your upbringing in life, you're going to feel different sympathies. If you're the favorite child at home, perhaps you're going to feel less sympathy towards Edmund and the sisters. But if you're, maybe an outcast child, or like not in a literal sense, but like you always feel like your brother or sister was loved more than your parents than you. We always, especially as teenagers, we have that thought, they love us more than them. And there's a teenage petulance about that allows the three of them to go, well, I'm going to take your toys because I can't, because I'm actually really smart. And fundamentally, the three of them are really smart.
Yeah, and you would imagine, as you say, there's a familiarity around them. And you would imagine that prior to this, they would have had some connections. I think they're not strangers.
No, I think the two girls, as Edmund climbs up a social ladder, find it acceptable to be around him.
Yeah.
And acceptable to start a relationship with him. You see that they both want to marry him by the end of the play. That's something that wouldn't have happened at the start. Like, Edmund's not considered for Cordelia at the start of the play. Like, she has two suitors come in. Edmund's not one of them. But by the end of the play, he has all of this power. He has his father's power. He has his father's office. So the two girls could see it fit that he could lead by their side. So ultimately he gets what he wants because he's pretty close to being king at that point. And we can presume that he has, like at the end of it, when he talks about let the other devise the other speedy taking off, one sister's going to kill the other sister and he's going to be with them. That's as close to king as he's getting. And, that's what he wants at the start of the play, isn't it?
It's funny, you kind of get the idea of him as this puppet master. He's just in the background, maneuvering pieces and people, and that's his skill.
Well, it was something that we, in our full production, we did, that at the start of the play, everybody sat down and I walked onto the stage and I went and I started the play, which I definitely think, as far as a character who's not on stage that much in the great aspect of Richard III or Hamlet or Macbeth or, the big ones, he's not on stage that much. But he's definitely, as you say, the puppet master in the background, whispering in Goneril's ear, maybe we should do this, or here's a letter going, he's definitely doing that stuff, hiding stuff. And he's definitely the puppet master of everyone's demise, arguably, because if he didn't drop Gloucester in it, Lear they might have got Lear offside and got Lear to Cordelia quicker and everything could have been different. But because of the things he does, the ultimate demise of the play the fundamental good characters are no longer there.
So what came up a lot in, like, we did these workshops quite a bit with schools, is that always at the end, the students were unsure whether they should have any empathy for Edmund. It's like, because he comes out, as you mentioned earlier, he's like, some good might I do, and it seemed to be quite a big switch. And it's like, how do you understand that as an actor? And also, just for anyone that's watching, we did do an abridged version of the play, so it's 90 minutes, so there is less text to kind of get you to a point, but it still seems a very quick switch at the end.
It is, and I think it's all like you can watch loads of actors struggle with this switch. We got a really interesting conversation because a student asked us the other day, do you think he actually does, or is it just Shakespeare trying to get Cordelia's body on the stage? Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting. Perhaps, Shakespeare was like, how do I get around this? Like, we do come at Shakespeare with a lot of art and a lot of everything is done with a purpose. And that's a fantastic read of it. And we have so long to analyze all of these things that we can presume that every word and everything was structured. And that's definitely a school and an approach with Shakespeare. But we know from working in theatre that a lot of the time we're like, we have to get this done. And we have to get her on. So perhaps, I don't know, he doesn't really show remorse. We talked about the bit before where Edgar basically, I won't say shouts at Edmund, because he doesn't really, but he's like, I'm your brother and you did this, and what? And when we were doing the full production, that was definitely the moment. It wasn't the hearing anybody was dead. Also, well, the lines where he talks about at least Edmund was loved, the two sisters. I think he realizes there that he could have had something, and he let it run past him, because I think he genuinely then sits and goes, "Oh, Goneril actually perhaps really felt something for me, and I messed that up," and that is maybe over sentimentalizing. But as we said, it was a short production, and I needed to get somewhere. But definitely the production the moments with the brother and before his death, they were always really nice moments. I always felt with Dave gave a real lock in and find what you need in this speech, and it was a nice moment. But going back to what you said about like people finding sympathy with him and reconciling that with themselves, he goes and gets what he wants, and that's not often viewed. Obviously, he's going to an extreme that's not acceptable, but like it's something that's not often viewed in an Irish society as a good thing. We see it a lot more in perhaps American politics and that side of things, but going out to get what you want and being honest about, I'm going to go and get what I want by any means.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I know we've mentioned before in other kind of chats we've had, is that with Shakespeare, it's all in the text. Like, there's no stage direction. Anything you need to understand about Shakespeare is in the text. So you have to just come at it and fix your own viewpoint and kind of like how you can understand a character. And I think it's really good, because from an actor's viewpoint, in order for you to get into a headspace, you have to understand them as a person, as opposed to a character.
I read something really interesting the other day. It was the Crash Ensemble. Was it the Crash Ensemble? I can't remember anyway. I think it was Helena Walsh shared it anyway, that she was saying that, I was Benjamin Mathis, and he was talking about, you don't ever try and figure a character out, you spend time with the character. And that's really interesting. Once you read this play, we have the luxury of going into the rehearsal room for a couple of weeks, and that's the point where you just do the scene so much that you get to the point where you'll eventually do the scene where you're not thinking about it, and that's when it happens. That's when it comes, and you can just watch your other characters on stage and they create you, and then the text comes out of that. So as if you're thinking about writing an essay about, like, or if you have to write an essay about Edmund, read the question and then think about the moment of the play and get into that headspace. What has just happened? What is going to happen? You have that, which is what, you don't have in real life, but you know where he's going. You know what's coming, and you know what's happened in the play. So read the question and take 2 minutes, breathe, take a big breath, and think about who he is, where he is, what he's done, and what he wants to do. And if you do that, that will inform your answer so much better, because you're not just going off, oh, I have to get this done.
Yeah.
I have to write an answer here that sounds intelligent. If you think of it as a human point of view, a human reasoning, and then go, right, okay, how do I say these words? Or, what way do these words come out when I feel like this? Is he tired at the start of the play? That's always a really easy one to go with at the start. Read out the monologue as if he's wrecked, as if he's so tired he can't keep his eyes open. And you'll hear the monologue differently. But always read it out. You try and read it out loud. I know you can't do that in an exam hall, but read it out loud. Then try something completely different. Read it like he has to go to the bathroom and he's trying to get through it as quickly as he can. He's trying to get his dad out of the way so he can go to the toilet, or try it. And there's a million ways you can try it, but you'll be surprised when you hear it with your own ears, how different it is than in your own head, because you get yourself out of the way and you can hear things. This is all, by an auricular assurance, have your satisfaction. He talks about, hearing things, and
yeah,
that's what it does,
Yeah, the difference between speaking Shakespeare and reading Shakespeare is huge. It's just like physically putting yourself in a space and reading it aloud just does change the words, so much. I always find it really interesting to either read it or also to watch the scene performed. Like, I get a whole different understanding of the scene then.
Yeah, like it's one of the first things I do once I get a part is I read it out loud, and you start to hear the voice of the person, of the character. Obviously, it's my voice, but it'll start to sound different because the rhythms and stuff aren't the way I talk. He'd break my rhythms, or there'll be full stops, or there'll be end stops, or rhymes and stuff like that. I don't tend to rhyme in my everyday life, so that tells me something about the character. But like, it's such an important thing to do. I cannot state how much more important it is that when you're studying Shakespeare to read it out loud. I know it's hard and I know it's awful, and I don't mean as a class. If you're not feeling it, if you're not confident in that way, that's fine. That's loads of people are like that. But genuinely, just wherever you are, just get under the covers of the bed and read it, with a torch. Just read it out loud, because it sounds so different. And you will find that, like the line we were talking about earlier, where Gloucester, says, if my father should sleep till I waked him. I did not understand that line properly until John read it out loud. And I was like, oh, there's the double entendre, or not double entendre, but like the double meaning of awake, like him, he's dead, that I didn't get it. And it was that reading that I went, oh, there's the revelation. And that happens 9 times out of 10. You don't understand something. And like, it's so foreign to our ears that it needs to be read out loud, because it's the only way it breaks. Sorry, it's so foreign to our eyes, like these, thous, and those. And
it's a difficult text, and I don't think there's any getting away from it. Like, it is a difficult text, but there are ways to approach it to make it easier to understand. And I think one of them is, as we've mentioned, it's getting up, it's speaking it. But then I think, again, if you look at Shakespeare and you realize the longevity behind it, is because, yes, it's set at court, yes, it's set in a time we're not familiar with, but it's all the human things are still there. It's all about families, it's all about feelings, it's all about reactions. So it's familiar because it's the universal.
He writes about the human condition. It's all about want, need, food. It's like, when you look at like Commedia dell'arte, the basis of sort of street theater and stuff like that, it's what is it? It's every character wants food, money, or sex. It's just, and that's effectively, if you take out the food scenario for Edmund, the other two motives are what he's going for. So you can break it down to that sort of stuff, and theater and movies, and none of that changes. The ideas of that are prevalent within most entertainment or storytelling, or those reasons. The only things that the reasons that we stumble with Shakespeare is because he writes things like tut, T-U-T, you know, and that it's in that stuff, tut,
Yes.
that I should have been, that I am.
Yes.
And some directors, and you will get different direction on this, and some will tell you to make that noise, that actually tut, and some people tell you to say it. And, you know, there's different scholars, and I'm not one of them, that will tell you the reasons, and the you know, like in Shakespeare, or in Hamlet, he says "oh" a lot. Oh.
Yeah.
But they're words. There's a reason, you know, like that has to be given as much gravity as to be or not to be. Oh, if this too solid flesh would melt, there's a reason that's there. There's no, and no matter how you use it or what you think it's there for, don't ignore it, because that's where you'll find emotion. Those words that don't make sense are where the emotion is. So say them, hear them out loud. As I said, scream them, shout them, get comfortable with those words. Because once you break the back of those things and those kind of knowledges of Shakespeare, and I presume that there's millions of videos on YouTube that talk about iambic pentameter and the reasons for the vowels and stuff like that. And I don't want to bore people with them, but like, just get comfortable with that part of it, and you'll find everything you need to know in the text, because all of the other words are still words we use today.
Yeah, no, it's true. And like, as you say, it's like there are hints in the text with the, you know, with the verse, with the non-verse and stuff, and it's like it gives you hints about emotions, but it's just getting comfortable with it. And I think that's from talking to a lot of actors and stuff, that's what they find. It's like getting used to it. But a question that we always get asked is like, how do you get it into your head? Because like there's a huge amount of text in Shakespeare. Like what's the shortcut? Is there a shortcut?
Hard work. It really is repetition. There's times that your brain takes things in easier, times of the day. I find when I get up, when I wake up, I have my cornflakes. Then stuff's going in, you know. I had to rehearsals for this show. I walked to rehearsals. It was a longer walk, you know. It would have been an hour and 20. And I would have I used that time because it's quiet. And people see you on the street and they're like, you're bonkers, because I'm reciting lines to myself. But you're never going to see those people again, so
it doesn't really
matter. That's record it. I know a lot of actors who record their lines and play them to them going to bed. I've heard that wouldn't be my thing now, because I like going to bed and turning my head off. But I know a lot of people who are like, it's class, you wake up and it's just there. I doubt that, but repetition. Once it's sort of in, and you can do it maybe with the book beside you, do it when you're like doing things like making tea or washing the dishes or tying your shoes, or just when you're not thinking about it, when your brain's not on it. That's how you get it in. Once it's sort of there. We had a teacher in the Gaiety School, Maureen, who would say, once you know your lines, then learn your lines. So once you think it's there, learn it. Like, I know students aren't learning it for the same reasons. They're not getting ready to go and say it in front of, you know, a room full of people. They're just reciting it. But you'll learn these and you'll have them for the rest of your life. Everybody has their leaving cert quotes still in there somewhere. It's the most common thing. It's the most common thing when you say, you know, I'm an actor to somebody. They will turn around and they will recite their leaving cert quotes to you.
Brilliant.
And you're like, great, thanks for that. Or they will turn around and be like, what's yours? And you're like, no.
It's been kind of overtaken by every other thing I've had to learn since, you know.
Well, Shakespeare has a real way of staying in. It does, like, and that monologue is a lovely monologue. And you tend to find, once there are certain characters that stay with you more. This one stays with me. This speech, I could probably, like the first monologue, it would take about 2-3 minutes and it would be back in my head. But there's other characters that I struggled with. That's what you got to ask yourself when you're learning a quote. You have to make it relevant for yourself. because that's the only way it'll go in. I struggled with other parts. I struggled with Macbeth when we were doing that with this, to grab onto something, to hang my coat on something, to understand it in the way that perhaps I understood this part, or I understood like Hamlet or other parts that I've played. There's times when the quotes and the lines just don't go in, and then you have to stand back and go, I need a different approach to this. Always be willing to set something down and walk away. Like sometimes you get yourself into, like studying, sometimes you get yourself into an absolute terrible space. And it's the same, I would argue it's the same as being an actor in that moment, that there's nights when you'll sit with the script in front of you and just be like, this is not going in. Go away, make yourself a cup of tea, have a bath, and come back the next day with a fresh head. Because if you don't, you're just going around in circles and nothing's going in, and you're not getting anywhere. And arguably you're doing more damage because you're starting to hate things and you're starting to get annoyed at stuff.
Dan, thank you so much for your participation. It's been great chatting to you. And hopefully anyone who's watching this gets a bit more of an understanding of Edmund's character. He is a phenomenal one. And thank you for your portrayal. And we hope you have fun watching this video. Thank you.